one as opposed to a monopoly one. And ultimately, Peter, the real test is what behaviours do you tolerate and what behaviours don't you? And in this process, within a period of 6 to 9 to 12 months, there were casualties.
Yeah.
And people would say there should have been more casualties, people said there should have been less, but in reality, some people in the new environment didn't survive.
Right, so you set down, here are the, more or less in a performance management sense.
That's right.
Here's what's expected of you. But there must have been a massive job, Mick, in terms of actually somebody sitting down and defining all of that. When you're talking about thousands now, a lot of the organisations we're talking about here don't have thousands of people working for them. They might have hundreds, or they might have, in the tens. But somebody had to sit down and say, the new culture is going to be this kind of behaviour in this position on a famous wet Wednesday morning. So it's got to figure that one out.
It is. I mean, it was a complex job in itself to actually decide on the new strategy, the new organisation, the new requirements going forward. Now, some of the people who came in at a very senior level had worked in that industry and probably would have been exposed to a deregulated environment much earlier. So they would have come with a lot of knowledge, which would have been very important.
Okay, one of the issues that we flagged here that we talk about is basically, the morale issue in relation to that. I would have presumed in that situation, and certainly I think I got the feeling for it during the involvement we had on that morale, there was kind of three kinds of morale, and there were those people who actually embraced this and ran with it, and it was great. There were those who were afraid their lives of it, and there were those who kind of had to suspend it, kind of their judgment on it. What was done there in order to try and lift the morale of the organisation and point them positively forward?
Well, there was a huge investment in training and development for new systems and processes. So if you look at it you have your customer pyramid, because this organisation would have had thousands and thousands of customers, which would have been of different value to it. So you would put in a different customer relationship management structure depending on your segments of customers. So there were new systems, new processes, a lot of training and development, a lot of work, I think, on trying to engage the organisation. Now, Peter, you could talk to a lot of people here and they'll say morale is on the floor here,
Yeah.
But to me, I don't know if I've ever got my head fully around the issue of morale, because a lot of organisations will say morale has never been as bad here, And every year, Dave Byrne said when he left RTE, he said, I've been here for 30 years, and what I can say is that every year when I talk to people, they say morale can't get any worse, but still they say it the next year, So there's the issue of morale, but sometimes what's more important to measure is the extent of to which people are engaged in their work, and what are their behaviours, what are they delivering. Morale is to me is a little bit vaguer,
Okay, so when we were looking at coming out of that as well, you obviously had to put into place, we spoke about it last week, if you're moving on a new trajectory, moving in a way that says this is a new direction, it's new standards, new everything, someone's got to measure that. Now there are lots and lots of measurement tools out there and ways of measuring performance and all of that. What did you do there, Mick, looking around that, scanning the horizon of all the various different options you have for measuring? What did you select, and how did you select them?
So for the 5 business units, they would have had very smart objectives. They would have specific measures that they were to deliver on every year, and those would have been cascaded right down. I would have had very specific objectives that I was to deliver on. And I think to a greater or lesser degree, the drive coming from the top was focus on your objectives, focus on the deliverables. The difficulty on a day-to-day basis was that, in such a change program of enormous proportions, and we spoke previously about how irrational change can be, the stuff that is coming at you on a day-to-day basis is completely separate to what your objectives are saying, or what you're meant to deliver, because if you're working in HR, you're confronted constantly with people who are being disrupted by the change, who might be unhappy. Managers have to deal with that. Yet the drive coming from the top is focus on the business. So I can't say it wasn't traumatic. I can't say it wasn't completely disorientating, because it was an incredibly disrupted environment. It's the nature of it when you come very quickly from that monopoly settled environment to something that's really just thrown up in the air. Okay, but also you had at that stage, of course, you were dealing with unions there as well, and where you're looking at that kind of massive change and negotiating that with the unions. You did that, Frank, that's one of the areas that you would be involved in. Just talk to us about the approach that you would use with unions in saying, who are used to kind of maybe saying, going along in the one direction and everything being, negotiated and tit for tat, and you give me this, I'll give you that. Now we're doing a massive transformation thing. The whole thing's changed upside down. So tell us, Frank, how you approach unions in relation to that.
Well, in my experience, often what happens is that the attitude to the union stays the same, because lots of managers are conditioned to dealing with the union only in the context of negotiating terms and conditions of employment. and there's that adversarial. For good or for ill, the model that we follow generally, I mean, I'll leave aside social partnership sort of at a national level and the whole partnership thing, which was very beneficial. But the fundamental model we still follow, and which we revert to in times of crisis, is the adversarial model. So that there's always a perception between management and the unions that we're here and it's going to be rows and it's all going to be friction. But in a change environment, one of the key things is to recognise that you must bring the unions on board. Now, when you talk about the union, there is this sort of perception of the great amorphous union which is separate to the organisation. But when you actually boil it down, that part of the union that you're talking about are your employees. They may happen to be members of a union, but they're still your employees. So it's very important to get them involved, but also to involve the structure of the union in the process. And up front, very clearly, management should be very clear that there's a distinction between the role of the union in negotiating terms and conditions and being involved with not with management, but with the organisation, with the structure, having an involvement, being involved in a huge program, which is going to affect them.
That's a mindset change for both parties.
Both parties. Yeah.
Okay, so how do you manage to get that?
And very often unions don't want to be. We say, look, you get on with it. Yeah. We'll wait till you're finished and we'll ambush you. And Lyndon Johnson and the tent comes to mind. So it's important to get them in.
Sorry, I missed that one. Is it broadcastable?
It's not broadcastable.
All right, okay. We'll figure it out. We'll put it up on the website later on.
Well, it's a matter of perspective if you're looking out or looking in.
All right, okay. If we're better off to be inside the tent as it were outside. Yeah, okay, right.
So from a management point of view, you're better off having the union inside the tent with you.
Yes.
Than having them on the outside waiting for you until you've come along and said, these are all the changes we need to make, and they're standing by and saying, no, over our dead body.
How do you manage that, Mick? How did you manage that at the time? Because this was huge change.
It was huge change. I think the issue for the unions that really probably would have captured their attention was the degree to which the company was losing business and the implications ultimately that would have in terms of jobs. So at a certain level, at a strategic level, they had to buy into the change process. There was a lot of difficulty in negotiating it. With the 5 business units, there were partnership structures in place for every business unit. So there was a partnership committee between the business managers and the unions. Now, in that kind of process, it really, it can be frustrating. It was one step up and 2 steps back for a lot of managers. And when I spoke of casualties, people came in from the outside who wanted to do things in this environment, and they didn't survive because
these are people who are hired in jobs and positions who thought they could do the devil and all in this new environment.
In this new environment, and I suppose there's a big lesson here, I think, which is that organisations are different. This is a big organisation. It's political.
Yes.
Unions are strong. If you come in, you need to be very careful to know how decisions are made, how the culture works, because if you can't work with it and actually and move it as you go along, it's going to do you.
Yeah.
It's going to devour you. And there were cases here of very bright people who came with very strong track records from companies who would not have been unionised, for instance, who were devoured by that culture.
Okay, the question came in here, it's kind of related to that, and it says that, do you find staff are over the first few months happy to still have their job, but then feel a little undervalued as they realise their responsibilities mean giving more for less? The new environment, that they happy to get the job in the first place because they've survived, and now they're going to have to work an awful lot harder, do more for less, and they feel undervalued. Did that happen in that case, Mick, or in your case, do you remember, or in general, how do you deal with that?
Because perceptions change over time, and what they're willing to accept, engage with, and do at the outset of a process changes as the process goes along.
Yeah,
they change as well. The organisation changes. What's required of them changes.
Yeah,
but that's what you're at. You're getting the change. Hopefully, the behaviour changes, and yes, you can have all those issues. I'm unhappy. I thought this was going to be better. It's promised more than it's delivered. The wet Wednesday reality, is not good for me.
Yes,
I've been left out in all this.
But I presume
I think it is